At the beginning of the Middle Ages, two major empires at war with each other for several centuries dominated the Mediterranean and the Middle East. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, covered southern Europe, northern Africa, and the eastern Mediterranean. Its capital was Constantinople. Its literary and administrative language was Greek, and the dominant religion was Christianity. Following the Council of Chalcedon in 451, Christians were divided into the Chalcedonians, also known as Diophysites, who believed that Christ was both divine and human, and the Monophysites, who believed that the Christ was solely divine. In addition, there were numerous Jewish communities in the Byzantine Empire. The other great empire was that of Persia. Governed at this time by the Sassanid dynasty, it stretched from Mesopotamia to today's Pakistan. Its capital was Ctesiphon. The main language was Persian. The official religion was Zoroastrianism, a monotheism which celebrated fire as a divine symbol. Many Jews and Christians also lived in the Persian Empire. To the south, as the land gradually gave way to desert, the inhabitants were mostly nomadic or semi-nomadic Bedouins, although some tribes lived in the towns. They spoke an early form of Arabic. While most of the inhabitants were polytheists, believing in several gods, Christian and Jewish tribes could also be found in their midst. In order to strengthen their positions, the Byzantines and the Persians sought to establish alliances. Both empires wanted the Arab tribes on their side and enlisted nomadic warriors in their armies. In the first decades of the 7th century, war between the two empires broke out once more. The Persian armies captured Syria and Palestine and then Egypt and went on to threaten Constantinople. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius and his army invaded Mesopotamia and reached Ctesiphon, the heart of Sassanid power, before taking back control of territories previously lost to the Persians. These wars greatly weakened both empires, especially Persia, and as a result, the Arab tribes launched raids along their southern frontiers. Islam is a monotheist religion which emerged in the Arab Peninsula at the beginning of the 7th century. At the time, this desert region was inhabited by Arab tribes which were mostly polytheist, although some were Jewish or Christian, and thus monotheists. This new religion began with a revelation to Muhammad, who was originally from Mecca. Muhammad is considered by Muslims to be a prophet, the last of the great prophets after Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. The revelation received by Muhammad was later transcribed by his disciples in the sacred book of Muslims, the Quran. In Mecca, there was the Kaaba, a temple dedicated to the divinities of the polytheists, which attracted large groups of pilgrims. Considering them a threat to business, the city's rich merchants disapproved of the preachings of Muhammad, and subsequently, in 622, they forced him to flee with his companions to the oasis of Yathrib, later known as Medina. This date marks the beginning of the Muslim calendar, which divides the year into 12 lunar months totaling 354 or 355 days. In Medina, Muhammad organized his community and laid down the precepts of his new religion. Thus, in 624, he decided that believers would no longer say their prayers facing Jerusalem, but would turn towards the Kaaba, the temple in Mecca which was thought, according to Muslim tradition, to have been founded by Abraham. Muhammad took up arms against his opponents. After several battles, he was victorious over his enemies in Mecca and forced several tribes to support him, including some which were Jewish. On the death of Muhammad in 632, a decision had to be made regarding the community's future political leadership. Rather than choose the Prophet's son-in-law Ali, the leadership was given to one of his companions, Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph, that is to say, the first successor to Muhammad. Abu Bakr's position was challenged by a major revolt led by the Bedouins, who refused to pay taxes and were ready to abandon Islam. This uprising was crushed, and a large part of Arabia came under Muslim domination. Following the death of Abu Bakr in 634, another companion of the Prophet, Omar, took power. The second caliph launched new conquests. He was assassinated after reigning for 10 years in 644. Uthman became the third caliph. He arranged for a single official version of the Quran. He was assassinated as well in 656. Ali, the Prophet's son-in-law, succeeded Uthman, but, upon his rise to leadership, quarrels within the community developed into a civil war known as the Fitna. Ali's supporters became the Shiites, a separate branch of Islam alongside the Sunnites. This situation was resolved by an arbitration which forced Ali to transfer power to Muawiyah, the governor of Damascus. Refusing to accept this decision, some of Ali's supporters turned against him and formed a third branch of Islam, the Kharijites. A Khariji assassinated Ali in 661. Muawiyah took the title of Caliph and moved the capital to Damascus. He then established the first Muslim dynasty, the Umayyads. According to the Sunnite Muslim tradition, the first four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, are known as the rightly guided caliphs, or the Rashidun caliphs. The long wars between the Persians and the Byzantines during the first decades of the 7th century weakened both empires. As a result, Arab tribes began to launch raids across their borders, and the success of these first incursions attracted more warriors to join in these military expeditions. In 636, the main Byzantine army in Syria was defeated on the Yarmouk River. With little hope of reinforcements arriving quickly, several inland cities, Damascus, Homs, and Jerusalem, negotiated their surrender. Caesarea, the province's capital, was not captured until 641 following a long siege. In Iraq during the mid-630, the multiplication of Arabic raids paved the way for an invasion of the Persian Empire, which was undergoing a period of socio-political disorder. In 636, Muslim troops numbering several tens of thousands of soldiers routed the Persian army in the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah on the Euphrates. The following year, in 637, the capture of Ctesiphon, capital of the Sassanids, led to the collapse of the Persian Empire. In the west, Egypt, a rich province in the Byzantine Empire, was poorly prepared to defend its territory. By marching along the Mediterranean coast and crossing the Sinai Peninsula, the Muslim armies invade this province towards the end of 639. In 641, the death of the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius in Constantinople led to a succession crisis. This situation meant that Byzantine reinforcements could not be sent to Egypt and gave leverage to those in favor of negotiation with the invaders. The treaty concluded by Cyrus, the Melkite Patriarch of Alexandria, placed Egypt under Muslim domination. The province was required to pay tribute to their conquerors, and all Byzantine troops were ordered to leave Egypt from the port of Alexandria within 11 months. In the space of 3 decades, the Arabs had conquered an empire that stretched from the Arabian Peninsula to Syria, Palestine, Iraq, Persia, as far as Khorasan, Egypt, and Cyrenaica. The speed with which this conquest took place was due to the depletion of both empires, in particular the Persian Empire, as well as to the feeble resistance to the Muslim invaders by the local populations, such as the Jacobite Christians, Nestorians, and Copts, who were considered heretics under the Byzantine Empire. During their conquests, the Arabs settled in existing cities, such as Aleppo, Damascus, and Alexandria, but also founded camp towns like Kufa, Basra, and Fustat to shelter the warriors, their families, and the tribes. In some regions, however, progress was more difficult. The Arab armies failed to conquer Nubia, while in the Maghreb, there was strong resistance from the Berbers. In 655, attempts to take Constantinople were unsuccessful. Unlike the Persian Empire, the Byzantine Empire did not collapse. In the second half of the 7th century, the Muslim community faced 2 civil wars which curbed the momentum of its conquering campaign. Nevertheless, at the beginning of the 8th century, Tripolitania and a large coastal area in the Maghreb came under Muslim control. Carthage was captured in 698 and Tangiers in 708. In 711, a Berber general crossed over the Strait of Gibraltar, taking advantage of the deep divisions plaguing the kingdom of the Visigoths. His Arab-Berber troops rapidly conquered a large part of the Iberian Peninsula. Beyond the Pyrenees, these conquering armies extended their territory as far as the area around Narbonne and remained there for a few decades. However, the siege of Toulouse in 721 ended with the defeat of the Muslim armies. The victory of Charles Martel and his Frankish army in a battle between Tours and Poitiers in 732 marked the end of Muslim advances in the west. A few years earlier, the Muslim armies had been defeated at Constantinople. The land siege lasted 13 months, but the Byzantines were able to avoid being blocked from the sea by twice destroying the Arab navy through the use of Greek fire. Far from their base and having difficulty obtaining provisions, the Muslim forces were almost completely wiped out. Towards the east, in 711 to 712, the Arab armies invaded Sind, a province in today's Pakistan. Further north, Samarkand was captured in 712. Then the Arab conquerors had to combat a rebellion in Transoxiana and further incursions by the Turks and the Chinese. Their victory over Chinese troops at the Battle of Talas in 751 has sometimes been seen as the event which marked the end of the Chinese advances towards the west, while confirming Muslim domination over Central Asia. The creation of this immense unified territory stretching from Spain to India brought together the most prosperous regions of the Persian and Byzantine empires. It allowed the conquerors to accumulate considerable wealth and enabled the multiplication of trading and cultural exchanges, which led to the development of a brilliant civilization. While government of the empire was in the hands of Muslims, local populations were able to maintain their own religions. Nevertheless, some inhabitants preferred to convert to Islam in order to obtain administrative positions or to avoid paying the jizya, a tax on non-Muslims. The creation of the Islamic Empire in the wake of Arab conquests during the 7th and 8th centuries led to the unification, for the first time, of territories to the west and east of the Middle East, and brought together parts of the coasts along the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. Peace in the empire's territories, implementation of the same legal standards from the Iberian Peninsula to Central Asia, and, most importantly, adoption of common currencies, the silver dirham and the golden dinar, encouraged economic prosperity and the development of trade. Within the empire, both ancient cities, such as Damascus, and new towns like Fustat benefited from spectacular growth. This urban expansion increased demand for basic necessities and stimulated agriculture and crafts, while at the same time encouraging the development of trading networks over long distances in order to satisfy the demands of urban elites for luxury goods. Across the Indian Ocean, ships brought spices from the Maluku Islands and the Malabar coast, and precious wood, silk, and ceramics from China. Along the Dnieper and Volga rivers, the boreal forests supplied skins and furs. From Western Europe came timber for construction and metals that were not available in the Islamic Empire. The trans-Saharan routes brought ivory and ostrich feathers, and above all, gold extracted from mines in West Africa which had not been known in the ancient world. Finally, slaves were brought in from all regions neighboring the Islamic Empire and placed as domestic servants or enlisted in the armies. The presence of Islamic currencies in areas beyond the empire's frontiers, for example in Cluny in France and Gotland in Sweden, is evidence of trade over much longer distances than ever before. In 762, the city of Baghdad was founded and Iraq became the center of the empire, while Mesopotamia emerged as the crossroads for long-distance trading routes. Maritime commerce passed through the Persian Gulf and the port of Basra, while on land, roads with regular staging posts converged on the new imperial capital. In the 10th century, however, with the creation of the Fatimid Empire based in Egypt, more trading goods traveled from the Indian Ocean towards the Red Sea and encouraged renewed trade in the Mediterranean, which had been seriously reduced during the early Middle Ages. Letters from major Jewish merchants in Fustat illustrate Egypt's new importance. The network of their correspondence stretched from Italy to the west coast of India and through all major urban centers in the Islamic world. The Arab conquests reached their furthest boundaries by the middle of the 8th century, with the help of Berber forces in the west and Persian armies in the east. The empire emerging from these conquests was the largest known in history, but its territorial unity was soon under threat. The westernmost provinces were the first to secede. The Great Berber Revolt, which stretched from Tangiers to Tripolitania in the 740, allowed the area from the Iberian Peninsula to west of the Maghreb to escape from the control of the Umayyad caliphs based in Damascus. Only the region of Ifriqiya, around Kairouan, was brought back under their control. In 762, the capital's transfer from Damascus to Baghdad bears witness to the shift of the empire's center of gravity towards the east. Baghdad had been founded by the Abbasids, who overthrew the Umayyads. In the 10th century, however, two other aristocratic Arab families sought to take over the caliphate in order to gain total domination of Islam and sovereignty over the empire. The Fatimid dynasty of Ismaili Shiites proclaimed their caliphate in Ifriqiya in 909. The Umayyads, descendants of the first Arab dynasty, also declared a caliphate in the Iberian Peninsula in 929. Nevertheless, the political unity of the empire was not fundamentally threatened since both dynasties sought to take the place of the Caliphate in Baghdad. However, only the Fatimids marched into the Near East. In 969, their conquest of Egypt and the establishment of the city of Cairo gave birth to a unified Mediterranean empire which covered the Maghreb, Sicily, the Nile Valley, and the southern part of Syria. In the east, the Abbasid Caliphate remained without rivals, but from the 9th century had to recognize the autonomy of some provincial governors, including the Persian Sassanid dynasty, which controlled Central Asia and eastern Iran. By the mid-10th century in Baghdad, the Abbasid caliphs, whose power had diminished considerably, came under the control of Persian Shiite warlords, the Buyids, who now governed Iraq and Iran on behalf of the caliph. Fragmentation of the Islamic Empire changed substantially during the 11th century. Apart from the Fatimids, who maintained their position in Egypt, the Arab dynasties dating back to the early years of Islam were overthrown or entirely dispossessed of their authority by new powers. In the east, the Seljuk Turks, arriving from the Asian steppes leading a strong migration of pastoral peoples, imposed their control over the caliph in Baghdad. They extended their domination from Central Asia to northern Syria and sought to take Anatolia from the Byzantine Empire. In the west, the Almoravids, Berbers who rebelled in the Sahara in favor for a more strict form of Islam, conquered the western regions of the Maghreb and blocked Christian expansion in the Iberian Peninsula. From the end of the 11th century, Crusaders invaded the Holy Land and soon after, Egypt. The struggle against this new adversary was led by Turkish and Kurdish generals and made it possible for Saladin to reunify the Near East under the banner of the Ayyubids. The Islamic Empire, now definitively broken up, gave birth to 3 territorial regions that experienced different outcomes. The East, dominated by Turks and now looking towards conquering India. The West, ruled by Berbers who faced the Christian threat from the north. The Near East, where Egypt and Syria are reunited under one banner, in order to fight against the Crusaders, now held the center of the Islamic world. The survival of the Abbasid Caliphate until the Mongols captured Baghdad in 1258 changed nothing